Since 2008, we had 10 years of congratulatory backpatting over the system of financial regulation.
It's a strategy to create jobs, to help responsible homeowners, to restart lending, and to grow our economy over the long term.
10 years of low inflation and low interest rates.
At the Federal Reserve, we are strongly committed to achieving the monetary policy goals that Congress has given us: maximum employment and price stability.
10 years of periodically oil-driven economic growth.
And in coordination with central banks around the world, the Fed has injected much-needed liquidity into our financial system.
And 10 years of exploding housing prices, of rent evictions and dim evictions, of working people pushed out of some cities, and a real estate investment bonanza for the homegrown and foreign rich.
It's an inconvenient truth this Christmas. We are in the grip of a rental and homeless crisis, the likes we've never seen before.
Owning a home is one thing, while renting is another, but whatever option you choose, it isn't pretty these days.
It's really hard to afford before, but now it's just even more difficult. It's a lot more strain.
Thinking back to what I paid years ago and compare that to today, it's crazy. I don't know how people afford it, particularly younger people.
10 years after the crisis, the Australian and Canadian housing markets are facing a crisis due to skyrocketing prices, an increasing population with no homes to accommodate the growing population, and a lack of affordable housing, leading to most people being homeless. What is the cause of this housing crisis? Population growth is another crucial factor influencing housing starts. As the population increases, the demand for housing naturally rises. Cities and regions experiencing robust population growth often witness higher housing starts to accommodate the growing demand. When the rate of housing starts cannot keep up with demand due to growing population, the resulting housing shortage further decreases housing affordability. According to economists, Canada is currently playing catch-up with immigration following a standstill over the pandemic. Current levels of immigration are at 500,000 new inhabitants a year and are expected to stay at this level for coming years. Simply put, Canada is not building houses fast enough to accommodate the number of newcomers. A report released in June by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation shows that over 22 million housing units will be required by 2030 to help achieve housing affordability for everyone living in Canada. This is 3.5 million additional units to the current National Housing Plan. The shortage comes while Canada pursues record levels of immigration, causing concern among both Canadians as well as newcomers. The fear is that a rapid population increase is driving up demand, lowering supply and raising prices to the point where homeownership is out of reach in Canada. In Australia, the population has jumped more than 30% over the last 2 decades to the current 26 million. A big reason for this has been much higher net immigration rate since the mid-2000s, which has fueled demand for new homes. Australia's population growth has really accelerated since the early 2000s, but the rates of home building didn't keep up, especially for apartments and units. Over the last 30 or 40 years, they've essentially built the same number of houses per year. With immigration now at record levels, this shortfall will only worsen unless Australia dramatically ramps up its housing production. Australian governments are set to target 1.2 million new homes in the next 5 years, starting from July 2024. They will be building 240,000 houses each year. Delivering on this will be a challenge, as over the last 5 years they only managed to supply 1 million new homes. Material constraints and skill shortages have arguably increased, and commencements have already slumped to around 175,000. This target is highly unrealistic given that they have builders falling over left, right, and center. They've got higher structural costs because of the supply constraints such as the shortage of building materials, and the world over has blown out the costs of building new houses. Labor constraints have also been quite acute in residential construction, particularly over the last 3 years as travel restrictions locked out overseas workers. Are you ready to elevate your style? Look no further than FSC Investors Store, your go-to destination for the most fashionable and comfortable t-shirts and hoodies. From sleek and minimalistic to edgy and expressive, we've got a style for every mood and occasion. Our premium quality fabrics ensure a soft touch and durability that lasts. And the best part, we offer a wide range of sizes to embrace every body type, because at FSC Investors Store, we believe fashion is for everyone. Treat yourself or find the perfect gift for your loved ones. Please head over to the store underneath this video and redefine your wardrobe with the latest t-shirt and hoodies trends. Your support will be highly appreciated. Let's get back to the video. The limited housing supply has resulted in skyrocketing home prices, making it increasingly challenging for first-time home buyers to enter the market. The high demand for a limited number of properties has driven up bidding wars, further inflating prices. As a result, many individuals and families are forced to rent for more extended periods, struggling to save enough for a down payment. Affordability is a leading obstacle in the housing crisis. According to the Canadian Real Estate Association, the average price of a home in Canada was $668,754 in July 2023, up 6.3% from July 2022. This is unattainable for many Canadians and newcomers alike. The average price of a home is higher still in Ontario and British Columbia, where the majority of newcomers choose to settle. Homes in these provinces cost $856,269 and $966,181, respectively. A report by the Environics Institute released in October 2022 showed that 15% of Canadians believe that immigrants are driving up home prices and making them unaffordable for others. However, a report by the Royal Bank of Canada disagrees with this and says that the housing shortage can be attributed to a higher residential construction price. The report says the price index has increased by 51% since the start of the pandemic in 2020. Prices are higher because of a shortage of skilled workers, a low supply of raw materials leading to higher costs, and increased input costs. Additionally, the report says that labor costs are higher due to a high number of job vacancies within the construction sector. Many skilled trades workers in Canada are approaching retirement and leaving gaps in the workforce that employers must work harder to fill. Potential employees are seeking higher wages because they have more options. Increasing the number of skilled workers could create more competition for jobs among workers and potentially lower production costs. Australia is also experiencing serious housing affordability issues. The cost of living in Australia is steadily rising, and housing prices are following suit. But it isn't just home buyers who are feeling the stress of housing insecurity. For those renting, increasing home prices means rents are going up too, and many aren't coping financially. Over 1 million lower-income households are paying housing costs which exceed the commonly used affordability benchmark of 30% of household income. While many Australians are struggling with housing costs, the majority of those in housing stress are private renters. Rising rent levels have also increased the pressure on public housing and crisis accommodation services and contributed to the current rate of homelessness. Between 2011 to 2016, according to ABC, the rate of homelessness increased from 47.6 people per 10,000 Australians to 49.8 people per 10,000. 58% of homeless people are also 34 years or younger, even though only 46% of Australians are in this age group. 1 in 5 homeless persons is also Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. Of all the states, NSW has the largest homeless population. It's also increasing at the fastest rate. The state faced a 37% increase in homelessness. While official statistics about homelessness haven't been updated since 2016, Specialist Homelessness Services reported that a third, or 32.3%, of its clients needing accommodation were not able to find housing in 2020 to 2021. This was an increase from 30.2% in 2016 to 2017. It's getting harder than ever to rent a home in Australia as one of the world's most acute real estate shortages worsens by the day. Less than 1% of the country's rental properties are now available for occupancy, far fewer than even red-hot markets like Singapore. That's sending rents soaring to eye-watering levels, deepening an already dire cost of living crunch and pushing thousands more Australians into homelessness. In Sydney, the crisis has seen rents for houses surge 16% in the past year alone, while apartments have risen 20% during the same period. At a time when more than 105,000 people are homeless, crisis accommodation services are turning away more than half of all those seeking new accommodation, mostly due to a lack of accommodation, and public housing stock has declined. Homeownership in Australia has been on a steady decline since the 2000s. A survey by the Household Income and Labor Dynamics in Australia showed that home ownership amongst 25 to 34-year-olds declined significantly from 52.2% to 29.2% between 1996 and 2014. At this point, many Australians, especially those in younger age groups, are giving up on owning homes and are forced to rent or move back in with their parents. What's causing this dip? Studies have found that a large part of this is due to rising real estate prices. Unfortunately, even renting might not put an end to the worries of those seeking housing, as increased costs in the housing market create a domino effect on renters. Don't forget to subscribe if you find this video informative. And please hit that notification bell so you will be notified when we drop another video. The IMF says Australian households with mortgages are at greater risk of defaulting on mortgage repayments due to higher levels of household debt, rising interest rates contributing to higher mortgage rates, and elevated house prices. Household borrowing in Australia has more than quadrupled from $530.9 billion to $2,288.3 billion over the last 20 years. In just the last 5 years, that debt has increased by almost a quarter, from $1,867.6 billion in December 2017 to $2,288.3 billion in December 2022. Household debt in December 2022 was 4.3 times the size of 20 years ago, and almost all of this increase has been in housing finance. Personal debt increased by a much smaller amount of 65% over this 20-year period, and in the last 5 years, when housing loans grew by 25%, personal loans fell by 6.2%. The net effect of the considerable $1,701.2 billion growth in housing finance over the last 20 years, compared to just $56.2 billion in personal loans, has resulted in personal lending dropping from a 16.2% share of total household debt in 2002 to 6.2% in 2022. Household debt in Canada has been rising inexorably. At the time of the recession in 2008, it stood at about 80% of the size of the economy. In 2010, it rose to 95%, and by 2021, debt had exceeded its size. By contrast, household debt in the U.S. fell from 100% of GDP in 2008 to about 75% in 2021. While U.S. households reduced debt, Canadians increased theirs, and this will likely continue to increase unless they address affordability in the housing market. If we take a look at the chart and study the figures, we can see how debt burdens have increased for countries on the right of the chart while decreasing for countries on the left. Australia, New Zealand, and Canada have seen household debt increase from already high levels. So as house prices increase in Canada, households take on debt, leading to a rise in the total amount of debt in the economy. Longer term, re-establishing housing affordability in Canada will be key to reducing household debt if they want to become homeowners. Over the last year, interest rates have increased as the Bank of Canada battles inflation. Over time, these higher interest rates translate into higher mortgage payments for households when those on fixed 5-year terms renew at higher rates. Those facing the most challenges are those with variable rate mortgages who see higher interest rates immediately. Risks are reduced by policy changes introduced a few years ago that required mortgage holders to qualify for mortgages at a higher rate. High levels of debt do most damage when a significantly negative external economic event happens, such as a global economic crisis, which leads to widespread job losses. It becomes difficult, if not impossible, for many mortgage holders to service their debt. Although the Canadian financial system has been stress-tested for significant losses, which will stop an economic downturn from being amplified through a Canadian financial crisis, widespread job losses in an economy where debt levels are high will make any recession more severe. Longer term, more debt today enables more products and assets to be purchased. However, the cost of servicing and repaying that debt slows economic growth over time. This outcome is more likely when this debt is incurred to finance house purchases that do not meaningfully improve the economy's potential. In the U.S., households' focus on repaying debts likely contributed to subdued U.S. economic growth over the last decade. The concern about debt is exacerbated by concerns over interest rate levels in the long term. Although the last decade was characterized by historically low interest rates and slow economic growth that some economists called secular stagnation, there is no guarantee that they will return to such a pattern after currently high inflation is addressed and interest rates start to decline. Some argue that with increased demands for investment to address an aging population, infrastructure needs, reshoring of manufacturing, and so forth, interest rates may have to remain high by recent historical standards to ensure sufficient savings. Structurally higher interest rates with Canada's household debt burden would further lower economic growth. There are also significant distributional concerns from the fallout from high debt. Households with less income tend to be more highly indebted. They rely on having jobs to service that debt and are disproportionately vulnerable to economic downturns. Now they are facing real pressure from higher housing costs. Fighting the housing affordability crisis requires a comprehensive and coordinated approach from various stakeholders, including government bodies, policymakers, and the private sector. This crisis can be fought by increasing housing supply, implementing targeted affordable housing initiatives, including the construction of subsidized or social housing for low-income individuals and families, enhancing support for the rental market through measures such as rent control, tenant protection, and incentives for the construction of purpose-built rental properties, and developing regional strategies to distribute economic activities and population growth more evenly.